Moving into our dream home was supposed to be the start of something amazing. My partner and I had spent years saving, searching, and daydreaming about the perfect place. When we finally found it, a charming 2-story house with a wraparound porch in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood, it felt like fate. The first few days were blissful. Birds chirped in the mornings, the scent of freshly cut grass lingered in the air, and neighbors waved as they passed, the kind of polite, suburban waves that made you feel like you were in a toothpaste commercial. It was almost too good to be true. And of course it was. The first sign that something was off came in the form of an envelope taped to our front door. We hadn't even finished unpacking when I found it fluttering in the breeze like an omen. The paper was thick, the kind that rich people probably used for wedding invitations, and the bold, all-caps print read, "Welcome to the neighborhood. Attendance required. HOA meeting this Saturday, ***. Required." That should have been my first clue that I wasn't just moving into a new house. I was moving into their neighborhood. At the time I shrugged it off. How bad could it be? I figured it was just some friendly neighborhood gathering where they handed out cookies and warned us about local teenagers loitering near the gas station. My partner and I decided to go, mostly out of curiosity and maybe, just maybe, because I had a weird feeling that ignoring the invitation might put us on some kind of list. That feeling? Turns out it was right. The HOA meeting was held in the local community center, a beige, windowless room that smelled vaguely of disinfectant and burnt coffee. There were folding chairs arranged in rows, a long table at the front, and because of course, judgmental stares from homeowners who had clearly been doing this for a while. And that's where I met Judith. Judith wasn't just the HOA president. She was the undisputed ruler of our suburban kingdom. Tall, thin, and draped in what I could only describe as business casual dictator attire, she carried a clipboard like a scepter and surveyed the room as if it were hers. When she spoke, her voice had the clipped efficiency of a woman who thrived on paperwork and crushing the hopes of anyone who dared cross her. After a long-winded speech about neighborhood harmony and enforcing community standards, Judith got to the real reason we were here: money. "As you all know," she said, her sharp eyes scanning the room, "maintaining our neighborhood's reputation requires investment. That is why we are implementing a 20% increase in HOA dues." A murmur spread through the room. Someone cleared their throat. Another neighbor audibly sighed. I, like an idiot, raised my hand. Sorry," I said, "but what exactly are we paying extra for?" Judith's eyes snapped to me. The clipboard lowered an inch. The air in the room shifted. "The board has determined," she said slowly, like she was explaining long division to a particularly slow child, "that these funds will go toward necessary enhancements, upgrading the community park, repainting the neighborhood sign, and ensuring compliance with safety codes." I frowned. "So, where's the budget breakdown?" Judith's lips pressed into a thin line. "The board has already reviewed the numbers. Residents don't need to be burdened with unnecessary details. Right, but if we're paying more, shouldn't we know exactly where?" "It's about trust," she snapped, and just like that, I knew I had made an enemy. My partner gave me a look that said, "Why can't you ever just let things go?" But I had already committed. The battle lines were drawn, and from the way Judith glared at me over the rim of her glasses, I got the distinct impression that my very existence had just been added to a spreadsheet titled "Residents to Watch." That was the moment things started getting weird. It began with the electricity. A few days after the meeting, I walked into the kitchen one morning and flipped the light switch. Nothing. The fridge. Dead. The coffee maker. Also dead. Assuming it was a power outage, I checked my phone. No alerts. I peeked out the window. Every other house on the street was fully powered, including Judith's, which I could see from my porch because she had installed 10,000 decorative garden lights that never seemed to turn off. Confused, I grabbed a flashlight and went outside to check the breaker box. That's when I noticed something strange. The power meter was missing. As in completely gone. I stared at the empty space where the meter should have been, my brain struggling to compute what I was seeing. Meters don't just disappear. They don't have legs. They don't go for a jog in the middle of the night. Someone had stolen my electricity. And because I had no idea what to do in this situation, I did what any rational person would do. I Googled, "Who steals power meters?" The results were not helpful. Eventually, I called the electric company. After an unreasonably long hold time, a customer service rep finally informed me that my service had been disconnected. For non-payment? I asked, my voice rising. No, she said. It was requested by, let's see, the Homeowners Association. I nearly dropped the phone. Requested by the HOA? On what planet did a neighborhood committee have the authority to unplug me from the grid? After demanding an explanation, the rep cheerfully informed me that my modifications to the property had been reported as violating HOA regulations, which somehow warranted a temporary service disconnection until I had resolved the issue. What issue? I asked, completely baffled. The rep hesitated. It just says unapproved alterations. Unapproved alterations? I hadn't altered anything. The chain. The chain I had put across my driveway to stop construction crews from using it as their personal turnaround. I hung up, my hands tightening into fists. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't a clerical error. This was deliberate. Judith was sending a message. And if she thought cutting my power was going to make me back down, she had seriously underestimated my ability to be extremely petty. I stood in my powerless kitchen staring at my lifeless coffee maker, already plotting my revenge. No electricity? Fine. Judith wanted a fight. She was going to get one. But first I needed my power back. After an agonizing call with the electric company, I managed to get a technician out the next morning. He was an older guy with a sun-weathered face, the kind of person who had probably seen it all and was too tired to care. He scratched his head as he stared at the empty spot where my power meter should have been. Well, that's a new one, he muttered. I crossed my arms. So, any idea how someone just takes a power meter? He sighed, pulling out a clipboard. I mean, technically it's illegal for anyone but the power company to remove it. Did you piss someone off? I exhaled through my nose. You have no idea. After about 30 minutes he installed a new meter and restored my power, giving me a warning that if it happened again I might want to file a police report. Which honestly was tempting. But if Judith was the one behind this, and let's be real, of course she was, I needed proof before going full scorched earth. And so began my era of surveillance. My partner, being the more reasonable one in this relationship, suggested I take a deep breath and maybe, just maybe, not declare war on an entire homeowners association. But I was already past that point. I ordered a set of security cameras online, installed them around the house and waited. For a few days nothing happened. And then at exactly 2:37 a.m. on a Wednesday, my phone buzzed with a motion alert. Half asleep I grabbed it and pulled up the camera feed. What I saw nearly made me drop the phone. A man was standing in my driveway. Not just standing, crouching. He was wearing dark clothes, holding what looked like a flashlight, and was inspecting my new power meter like it was a rare artifact. I sat up so fast I nearly knocked my partner off the bed. Someone's outside. They groaned. You have got to stop watching true crime before bed. I'm serious. I turned the phone toward them. The screen showed the grainy black and white image of the meter guy poking at the side of my house like a raccoon with a degree in electrical engineering. That got them awake. Call the police. I was already dialing. The response time in our neighborhood was, to put it kindly, not great, but by the time a patrol car pulled up the guy was long gone. I showed the officers the footage, but since the camera hadn't caught his face, there wasn't much they could do. Still, the fact remained, someone had come back. And I had a very strong suspicion about who was pulling the strings. The next morning I took a little stroll down the street, right past Judith's house. She was in her front yard, trimming a hedge that was already perfectly trimmed because that was just the kind of person she was. When she saw me she gave me one of those forced politician smiles, the kind that didn't quite reach her eyes. Good morning, she chirped, all fake sunshine. Lovely day, isn't it? Oh, so lovely, I said, pausing by her mailbox. Hey, funny question. Would you happen to know why someone was skulking around my house at 2 a.m.? Her smile didn't even flicker. Oh dear. That sounds alarming. Did you call the authorities? I gritted my teeth. Yep. Sure did. Well, I do hope they catch the culprit, she said, clipping a single branch off the hedge like she was doing something important. This neighborhood has such high standards. We wouldn't want it to become unsafe. I stared at her. She stared back, her expression perfectly neutral. And that was when I knew, she knew. I walked away before I did something dramatic like dropkick her mailbox. That night I set up a little experiment. I left my security camera feed open on my phone and intentionally left my porch light off. I figured if the guy came back he'd assume the coast was clear. Sure enough, at exactly 2:41 a.m. my phone buzzed again. This time I was ready. I jumped out of bed, grabbed the loudest flashlight I could find and bolted outside. The man was there again, hunched over my power meter holding a screwdriver. He saw me. I saw him. For a solid second we just stared at each other. Then, in the single dumbest move of my life, I shined the flashlight directly in his face like I was some kind of action hero. "Hey!" I yelled because apparently that was the best I could come up with. The guy panicked. Bolted. I chased him for exactly 3 steps before realizing I was barefoot and not built for sprinting at 2 in the morning. But my camera had gotten his face. And the best part? I recognized him. He was one of the contractors working on the house at the end of the street. The same ones who had been trespassing on my driveway. The next morning, fueled by caffeine and righteous fury, I took the footage straight to the HOA board. The meeting room was the same as before. Boring, beige, and filled with homeowners who had no idea they were about to witness the suburban equivalent of a courtroom drama. I marched to the front, laptop in hand, and pulled up the footage. "Judith," I said sweetly, "I thought you might want to explain this." The moment the video played, the room went dead silent. There he was. The contractor on my property, screwdriver in hand. People started whispering. Judith, for the first time since I met her, hesitated. That's not proof of anything," she stammered. "Who knows why he was there? Maybe he—" "Oh, I know why," I cut in. "And I'm pretty sure you do too." More whispers. Some side eyes. Judith's grip on her clipboard tightened. And that was the moment I knew. I wasn't just dealing with an HOA president on a power trip. I was dealing with something bigger. And I wasn't going to stop until I took it all down. The silence in the HOA meeting stretched, thick and uncomfortable. Judith's grip on her clipboard was so tight I half expected it to snap in half. The other board members exchanged wary glances, clearly realizing that this wasn't one of those small neighborhood squabbles they could brush under the rug. I let the footage play out one more time. The contractor. The screwdriver. The very, very obvious intent to mess with my power meter. Finally, someone cleared their throat. Mr. Henderson, an older man with a permanent frown and a reputation for being the neighborhood's unofficial lawn inspector. "Judith," he said, slow and deliberate, "why was a contractor who has no business being on private property messing with this resident's electricity?" Judith, to her credit, managed to compose herself remarkably fast. "This is all very misleading," she said, pushing her glasses up the bridge of her nose. "I have no knowledge of this man's actions, nor do I condone them." I scoffed. "Oh yeah. That's funny, because he works for the same company that's been parking construction vehicles in my driveway." A few people murmured. That little fact hadn't gone unnoticed. Judith's pristine reputation as the self-proclaimed guardian of the neighborhood's integrity was starting to crack, and I could practically see the wheels turning in the minds of the other homeowners. I think we're getting off track here," Judith continued, voice sharp as she attempted to regain control. "This meeting is meant to discuss our community's annual budget allocation, not entertain baseless accusations." I raised an eyebrow. "You know what's funny about that?" I clicked a few keys on my laptop and pulled up another file. "I took a look at those budget allocations you mentioned. Guess who's been awarded more contracts than anyone else for neighborhood improvements?" The projector screen flickered as I pulled up a spreadsheet of HOA expenditures. Specifically, a long list of payments made to one company. The same company the contractor worked for. The same company that had been causing problems since the day I moved in. Judith's husband's company. This time, the murmurs turned into outright whispers of suspicion. Even the board members who had probably been happy to let Judith run things unchecked, were suddenly realizing this wasn't looking great for them either. "That's public information," Judith said stiffly. "The contracts were fairly awarded." Were they? I leaned against the table, arms crossed. Because I'm seeing a lot of missing invoices here. And some, let's call them very questionable expenses. A few $1,000s for community beautification? But no actual receipts for what was done. Someone in the back let out a low whistle. Another neighbor, a woman named Carla who had once been fined for having the wrong shade of blue shutters, folded her arms. "So that's why our fees keep going up?" Judith's mask of control cracked just for a second. I don't appreciate the implications here," she sputtered. Oh, I think the implications are pretty clear, I shot back. And you know who might find them really interesting? The local news. That landed. For the first time since I met her, Judith looked genuinely rattled. She could brush me off. She could roll her eyes at complaints from neighbors. But an actual investigation? Public exposure? That was a whole different story. Judith's lips pressed into a tight line. "This meeting is adjourned," she announced, grabbing her clipboard and turning on her heel before anyone could stop her. The room erupted the second she left. It turned out I wasn't the only one who had been silently suffering under Judith's reign. By the time I got home, I had 3 texts from neighbors thanking me, 2 emails with additional shady financial records they had dug up, and a voicemail from a woman who claimed her fence mysteriously disappeared after she refused to pay a fine. And that's when I realized, Judith wasn't just power-hungry. She was running a racket. I needed help. And I knew exactly where to get it. Her name was Michelle. Local investigative journalist. Known for exposing small-town corruption, from shady business dealings to a city council member who got caught using public funds to buy a hot tub. I shot her an email, half expecting it to get lost in a pile of other tips. Instead, she called me within the hour. "This is wild," she said, and I could hear the excitement in her voice. "HOA corruption isn't exactly new, but this is next level." Over the next few days, Michelle and I did a deep dive into the HOA's finances, public records, and, most importantly, the construction company Judith had been funneling money into. The deeper we dug, the worse it got. Turns out, the contractor from my driveway wasn't just some random worker. He was one of Judith's enforcers. People who refused to comply with her rules. Mysterious property damage. Residents who questioned her decisions. Fines that didn't exist in any official records. One guy had his garage door ripped off in the middle of the night after he complained about HOA fees. And the worst part? Judith's husband was at the center of all of it. His company wasn't just getting the majority of neighborhood contracts. They were charging double what other businesses in town would have. Money was being drained from the HOA's funds, shuffled around in a shell corporation, and coming out the other side to finance Judith's personal life. Fancy vacations. A brand new car. Private tennis lessons. And yet she had the audacity to tell me I was violating HOA guidelines for putting a chain on my own driveway. Michelle's article was going to be big. The second she published it, the whole town would know exactly what Judith had been up to. But Judith? She must have sensed it was coming. Because the night before the story went live, something happened that made everything else feel like child's play. I was in bed, scrolling through my phone, when I heard a low mechanical hum outside my window. I frowned, pulling back the curtain. There was a drone. Hovering. Watching. And in that moment I knew, Judith wasn't done yet. The drone hovered outside my window, its tiny red light blinking like a mechanical eye. For a second I just stood there, my brain struggling to catch up. Judith had already sent a contractor to mess with my power, orchestrated ridiculous fines, and tried to publicly humiliate me. But this was next level. I grabbed my phone and did what any rational person would do at midnight when faced with a flying surveillance robot. I threw open the window and chucked a shoe at it. The drone dodged effortlessly, which frankly felt personal. My partner, still half asleep, groaned from the bed. "What are you doing?" "There's a drone," I whispered fiercely, pointing toward the window. They blinked blearily. "Like an alien drone?" "A Judith drone." That woke them up. By the time we both got outside, the drone had disappeared into the night like some kind of HOA-controlled UFO. But I wasn't about to let this go. I marched straight to my security camera feed and sure enough, there it was, floating outside my house like an electronic peeping Tom. Didn't take a genius to figure out where it came from. The next morning, fueled by coffee and righteous fury, I stomped over to Judith's house. She was outside as usual, fussing with her already perfect flower beds. If she was fazed by what was coming, she didn't show it. "Morning," she chirped. I crossed my arms. "Lose a drone last night?" Her expression didn't change, but I saw it. The brief flicker of something behind her eyes. He knew. "Drone," she said, voice coated in false confusion. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "Really?" I pulled up the footage on my phone and hit play. Because this little guy was hovering right outside my bedroom window. She barely glanced at the screen. "Oh dear," she said, not sounding remotely sorry. "Drones are such a nuisance these days. You never know who's flying them." I exhaled sharply. "Judith, cut the act." She gave me that rehearsed HOA smile, the one that probably made small children cry. "If you have concerns about privacy violations, I suggest you take it up with the authorities." Well, I plan to. But first I had another plan. Michelle's article was set to go live that evening, exposing everything. The embezzlement, the fraudulent contracts, all of it. I just had to survive long enough to see it published. Which, as it turned out, wasn't going to be as easy as I hoped. That night, I was just about to head to bed when my security cameras pinged me again. Another intruder. Except this time it wasn't a drone. It was two men. Wearing dark clothes. Walking toward my backyard. My stomach dropped. I grabbed my phone and immediately called 911. As the dispatcher answered, my partner peered over my shoulder. "Tell me that's just some really committed landscapers." I didn't answer. Because the two men had stopped at the edge of my yard. One of them pulled something out of his jacket. A gas canister. My blood ran cold. The shit. They were going to burn my damn shed down. Adrenaline took over. I bolted to the backyard door and flipped on every light I had, flooding the yard like a football stadium. "Hey!" I shouted, slamming the door open. The men froze. For a moment we all just stared at each other. Then they ran. By the time the police arrived, the arsonists were gone, but the security footage wasn't. And neither was Judith's connection to them. It didn't take long for the cops to identify them. Turns out they weren't just random thugs. They were employees of Judith's husband's construction company. The same one that had been milking HOA funds for years. And when the police confronted them, they flipped. Threw Judith and her husband right under the bus. The next 48 hours were chaos. Michelle's article dropped the same day Judith and her husband were arrested, and the fallout was spectacular. The HOA members who had been blindly following Judith suddenly developed amnesia, claiming they had no idea what had been going on. The neighborhood turned into a full-blown scandal zone, with news vans rolling through like we were the suburban version of Watergate. And Judith? Judith, who had spent years terrorizing the neighborhood, issuing bogus fines and running her shady little empire? She went down swinging. Literally. Because when the cops showed up at her house, she tried to fight them. As in full-on clipboard-wielding combat. I wasn't there to see it in person, but I did hear the story from about 5 different neighbors. Each one describing the moment Judith, realizing the jig was up, chucked a potted plant at an officer before being tackled to the ground. She was charged with everything: fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy to commit arson. Her husband wasn't far behind. And just like that, the reign of Judith the tyrant was over. The neighborhood felt different afterward. Quieter. Lighter. There was still cleanup to do. The HOA had to be restructured, wrongfully fined residents had to be refunded, and people had to relearn what it meant to live without fear of getting fined for having the wrong shade of mulch. A few months later, I got an email asking if I wanted to join the new HOA board. I stared at it for a long time. After everything I had been through, everything Judith had put me through, the idea of stepping into her old position felt both poetic and exhausting. But then I thought about it. If someone like Judith could run this place into the ground, then maybe, just maybe, someone like me could actually fix it. So I signed up. Just for a year. And let me tell you, watching the former Judith loyalists squirm when they realized I was now in charge of the rulebook? Absolutely priceless. The neighborhood was finally ours again. And this time, I wasn't going to let anyone take it away.